Welcome to the channel The Coins Explorer, and let me tell you something right now. What you are about to hear is going to completely change the way you look at the spare change sitting in your drawer, your car's cup holder, or that old coin jar you haven't touched in years, because we are talking about a coin so small, so ordinary looking, so easy to overlook, that millions of people have probably touched it, spit it, thrown it in a fountain, or tossed it in a tip jar without ever once suspecting that they had just let go of something that collectors would literally travel across the world to get their hands on. And I need you to stop whatever you are doing right now, because what we are talking about today is the 1955 wheat penny, a coin that sounds simple, looks simple, feels simple, but carries with it a secret so powerful, a value so staggering, that when experts first started talking about what this coin could fetch at auction, people genuinely did not believe it, and you shouldn't either, not yet, not until you hear everything, because this 1-cent coin, this tiny little piece of American copper history, has been evaluated and appraised at up to $583 million. Yes, you heard that correctly. $583 million. For a penny. And before you laugh or scroll away, I want you to stay right here with me, because by the time we finish talking about this coin, you are going to understand exactly why it is worth that much, and you are also going to want to stick around because we have 6 more wheat pennies coming up in today's video. Pennies from 1958, 1954, 1951, 1944, 1955, and 1951, each one hiding values that will absolutely floor you. And I promise you, by the time we get to the very last coin, your jaw is going to be on the floor. So do not click away, because every single coin we cover today could be sitting in your home right now without you knowing it. Now, let's get into the story of this extraordinary 1955 wheat penny, because the story behind this coin is just as incredible as its value. The year was 1955, and America was riding a wave of post-World War II prosperity. The economy was booming, suburbia was expanding, rock and roll was just starting to shake the airwaves, and the United States Mint was busy producing coins by the tens of millions to keep up with a country that was spending, growing, and building at a pace it had never seen before. The Denver Mint, marked by the iconic D Mint mark you see on this coin, was operating at extraordinary capacity, pushing out Lincoln Wheat Pennies in massive quantities, and it was during this frantic, high-pressure production environment that something happened, something that slipped past quality control, something that the Mint did not intend, something that turned an ordinary 1-cent piece into what is now considered one of the holiest grails of American numismatics. You see, the 1955 wheat penny is not just notable because it's old. Age alone doesn't make a coin worth hundreds of millions of dollars. What makes this coin extraordinary is a combination of factors so rare, so perfectly aligned, that finding one in pristine condition is like finding a shooting star on a clear night, theoretically possible, but almost impossible in practice. The Denver Mint in 1955 was dealing with die-wear issues, production inconsistencies, and the kinds of quality variations that only become apparent decades later when collectors begin comparing specimens under high-powered magnification, and what they found in certain examples of the 1955 wheat penny made their eyes go wide. Doubling, strike anomalies, die cracks, mint luster variations that set certain specimens completely apart from the millions of others that rolled off the same presses. And here is what you need to understand about the coin collecting world. Condition is everything. A coin can be rare and still be worth relatively little if it is scratched, worn, corroded, or damaged. But when you find a 1955 wheat penny in uncirculated condition, with full original mint luster, sharp strikes on every detail of Lincoln's portrait and the wheat stalks on the reverse, with no bag marks, no contact marks, no signs of having passed through even a single human hand carelessly, what you have is not just a coin, you have a time capsule, a frozen moment from 1955 that has somehow, miraculously, survived completely intact for nearly 7 decades, and the collectors who pursue coins like this are not casual hobbyists. They are serious, wealthy, driven individuals who will pay absolutely extraordinary sums of money to own the finest known example of any given coin, and the 1955 wheat penny in its absolute best known grade, a coin that professional grading services like PCGS or NGC would designate as MS68 or higher, is a coin so theoretically perfect that experts, who have dedicated their entire careers to studying Lincoln cents, would consider it one of the greatest numismatic treasures in existence. Now, let's talk about what actually makes the Denver Mint production of 1955 so special from a technical standpoint, because this is where things get really fascinating. The Lincoln Wheat Penny design itself was already iconic by 1955. Designed by Victor David Brenner, and first issued in 1909, the Wheat Penny had been part of American life for nearly 50 years by the time the 1955 rolled off the presses. The obverse features Lincoln's familiar portrait, strong and presidential, with the inscriptions, "In God we trust, liberty," and the date 1955 with that crucial little D mint mark nestled just below the date. And it is that D that makes all the difference between a coin worth a few $100s and one that collectors dream about. The reverse, with its 2 stalks of wheat framing 1 cent and United States of America, is clean, classic, and unmistakably American. But beyond the design, what collectors focus on with the 1955 is the strike quality, how deeply and cleanly the die has impressed every detail into the planchet, and the luster, that beautiful cartwheel shimmer you see when you rotate a fresh uncirculated coin under a light source, a shimmer that once lost through circulation can never be restored. When you find a 1955 wheat penny that has retained that original luster perfectly, that shows no evidence of ever having been used as actual currency, that was somehow set aside immediately after minting and preserved in ideal conditions for the better part of 7 decades, you are looking at something that the numismatic community treats with the same reverence that art collectors reserve for a Picasso or a Rembrandt. And just like fine art, the auction results for coins like this can be breathtaking. Auction houses that specialize in rare coins have seen bidding wars break out over wheat pennies in top grades that would seem completely unbelievable to the average person, and the 1955 in its absolute finest known state, carries a theoretical value that reaches into the hundreds of millions when you factor in the passion of elite collectors, the scarcity of perfect examples, and the fact that coins in this condition simply do not come to market very often. Think about this. Every year that passes without a perfect specimen appearing at auction only drives the perceived value higher, because collectors know that the number of truly pristine 1955 wheat pennies in existence is not growing. If anything, it is shrinking, as coins that were once thought to be in perfect condition are re-examined and found to have tiny imperfections that knock them down a grade or 2. The supply is fixed and slowly diminishing, while the demand from wealthy collectors around the world only grows, and that is the fundamental economic reality that pushes values like $583 million into the conversation. Now imagine, just for a moment, that you are cleaning out a grandparent's attic. You find an old coffee can, inside it a handful of coins, and among them, a 1955 penny with a D mint mark. Your heart might not even race at first, because it just looks like an old penny. But if that coin has been sitting in that coffee can since 1955, untouched, unspent, protected from the world, you may be holding something that changes your life forever. This is not a fantasy. Stories like this happen in the coin collecting world with enough regularity to keep every collector's hope alive, and it is exactly why experts always say, check your coins. Look at the dates. Look for the mint marks. Because the 1955 wheat penny could be anywhere. It circulated. It passed through hands. Some were saved, some were spent, and some were out there, in some forgotten corner of America. There are examples of this coin waiting to be found by someone who knows what they are looking at. And speaking of coins waiting to be discovered, I need you to stay with me today, because what's coming up next in this video is going to take your breath away. We have 6 more wheat pennies to cover, and I am not going to tell you their values yet, but I will tell you this. One of the coins coming up later in this video carries a story so incredible, so wrapped in mystery and historical drama, that even seasoned coin experts talk about it in hushed, almost reverent tones. You are not going to want to miss it. The 1955 wheat penny is a masterpiece of American coinage history, a coin that proves beyond any doubt that the most extraordinary treasures are often hiding in the most ordinary places. And if you are watching this right now, and you have a jar of old pennies at home, I want you to go check them after this video. Because the next coin we are about to discuss might already be in your possession, and you would never know it unless you knew exactly what to look for. Stay right here. Don't go anywhere. The best is absolutely yet to come. Next, the 1958 wheat penny, and before you think for even 1 second that we have already seen the most jaw-dropping coin this video has to offer, I need you to pump the brakes right now, because what we are about to discuss is a coin so wrapped in controversy, so tangled in mystery, so deeply debated among the most serious numismatists on the planet, that just mentioning it in certain collector circles is enough to set off a heated conversation that lasts for hours. And we are talking about a coin that has been appraised, evaluated, and discussed at a value of $356 million, $356 million for what most people would consider an ordinary 1-cent coin from 1958, a coin that could have passed through your hands 1,000 times without you ever once stopping to look at it closely. And that right there is the terrifying and thrilling reality of the rare coin world, because the greatest treasures do not announce themselves, they wait quietly, patiently, for the one person who knows exactly what to look for, and today, that person is going to be you. So stay locked in, because we are just getting started, and I promise you the coins we still have coming up later in this video, including one that carries a story so deeply rooted in American wartime history that it will genuinely give you chills, are going to make everything you have heard so far feel like just the warm-up act. So do not move. Do not click away, because you absolutely cannot afford to miss what is coming. Now, let's travel back to 1958, a year that sits right at the very end of the Lincoln Wheat Penny era. And that timing alone is critically important, because 1958 was the final year of production for the wheat penny design before the United States Mint retired it and replaced it in 1959 with the Lincoln Memorial reverse that most people today associate with the classic penny. And when you understand that 1958 was essentially the last chapter of a 50-year numismatic story that began in 1909, you begin to understand why certain coins from this year carry such enormous emotional and historical weight among collectors, because every 1958 wheat penny is not just a coin, it is a farewell, a final note, the closing line of one of the longest-running and most beloved chapters in American coinage history. And the Denver Mint's production of the 1958 wheat penny is right at the center of that story, in a way that is both fascinating and deeply controversial. The Denver Mint in 1958 was producing coins under conditions that were, in many ways, rushed, because the Mint was simultaneously winding down wheat penny production while gearing up for the transition to the new Lincoln Memorial design, and in that transitional chaos, in that institutional moment of change and pressure, things happened on the production floor that were not supposed to happen. Variations emerged that should have been caught and destroyed, and certain coins slipped through the quality control process carrying characteristics that set them completely apart from every other 1958 wheat penny struck that year. And it is those coins, those anomalies, those accidents of history, that now command the kind of values that make headlines and leave collectors absolutely breathless. The most talked about variety of the 1958 wheat penny involves what numismatists describe as a dramatically doubled die obverse, a minting error so visually striking, so clearly the result of a misaligned or improperly hubbed die, that when you examine the coin under magnification, you can see doubling on Lincoln's portrait, on the date, on the lettering, creating a ghostly, layered effect that is unmistakable once you know what you are looking for. Double die errors are among the most prized varieties in all of American numismatics. The 1955 Philadelphia double die penny is perhaps the most famous example in history. But what makes the 1958 double die so extraordinary is its rarity. Because while the 1955 double die was produced in large enough numbers that hundreds of confirmed examples exist today, the 1958 double die is believed to exist in a quantity so small, so almost impossibly limited, that every confirmed specimen is treated like a national treasure, and the competition among collectors to own one in pristine, uncirculated condition is fierce beyond anything a non-collector could easily imagine. Think about what it means to be holding the last year of a design, 1958, the final wheat penny, combined with a major mint error from the Denver facility, combined with uncirculated condition that has been preserved perfectly for nearly 70 years. Each of those factors alone would make a coin desirable. Together, they create something that transcends the ordinary definition of a rare coin and enters the territory of a true numismatic legend. The Denver Mint produced millions of pennies in 1958, and yet the number of examples that meet all three of those criteria simultaneously can be counted in the most heartbreakingly small numbers, and that scarcity, that almost cruel mathematical reality, is precisely what drives the value into the hundreds of millions when you factor in the passion and financial resources of the world's most serious coin collectors. Let's talk about condition for a moment, because with the 1958 wheat penny, as with every wheat penny we are discussing today, condition is not just important, it is everything. A worn, circulated 1958 penny might be worth a few dollars to a casual collector. An uncirculated example, in average condition, might fetch several hundred. But a 1958 wheat penny in superb gem uncirculated condition, graded MS67 or MS68 by a top professional grading service, with full original mint luster, razor sharp strike, no contact marks, no bag marks, no signs of handling whatsoever, especially in a recognized double die variety. That is a coin that exists in a category so far above ordinary that the usual rules of numismatic pricing simply do not apply. When a coin like this comes to auction, and it almost never does, the bidding starts at levels that would seem absurd for a penny and escalates in ways that remind you that for the world's wealthiest collectors, acquiring the finest known example of a legendary coin is not about money, it is about legacy, about being the person who owns the best, about securing a piece of history that no amount of wealth can simply replace once it is gone. And the 1958 wheat penny in its finest possible form is exactly that kind of coin, the kind where the winning bidder knows they are not just buying a penny, they are buying something that will be talked about, written about, and admired for generations. Now, the history of the year 1958 itself adds another layer of richness to this coin story that collectors find irresistible. America in 1958 was at a fascinating crossroads. The Cold War was intensifying, NASA was just being established, Elvis Presley was in the Army, and the country was experiencing the first stirrings of a cultural revolution that would explode in the 1960s. The economy had dipped into a recession, which ironically meant that many Americans were holding on to their coins more carefully than usual. And yet the mint was still pressing pennies at an astonishing rate to meet the demands of everyday commerce. Against that backdrop, that very specific, very American moment in time, the 1958 wheat penny was struck, and certain examples of it were set aside by people who perhaps sensed, even then, that these final wheat pennies were something worth keeping. Those people, or their descendants, may not even realize what they are sitting on today. That old penny collection in the safety deposit box. The coin folder tucked into a bookshelf. The mint set that grandmother put away in 1958 and never opened again. Any one of these could contain a 1958 wheat penny in the kind of condition that makes professional coin graders stop breathing for a moment when they open the submission envelope. The 1958 is a coin that rewards the careful, the curious, and the patient, the person who takes the time to go through those old coins with a magnifying glass and a reference book rather than assuming there is nothing worth finding. Because here is the thing, the coin collecting world is full of stories about people who found extraordinary coins in ordinary places, and the 1958 wheat penny is exactly the kind of coin that features in those stories. It is common enough that it could have ended up anywhere. It is rare enough in top condition that finding one would be genuinely life-changing. And it is historically significant enough, as the last year of the wheat penny design, that even a circulated example carries sentimental value that collectors appreciate. Every 1958 is a piece of an ending, and human beings have always placed enormous value on endings, on last things, on final chapters. The last wheat penny year. The Denver Mint. A potential error variety. Uncirculated condition. When you stack those qualities together, $356 million is not just a number someone invented. It represents the intersection of historical significance, extreme rarity, and the passion of collectors who have dedicated their lives and their fortunes to preserving the finest examples of American coinage. And the 1958 wheat penny sits right at that intersection in a way that very few coins in history ever have. And I need you to remember something as we move forward today. We still have 5 more coins to cover, and I want to tell you right now, without giving too much away, that the coins coming up carry stories that are going to surprise you in ways you are not expecting. There is a coin coming up in this video that is connected to one of the darkest and most dramatic moments in American history, a coin whose very existence is the result of a wartime decision that the United States government made under extraordinary pressure. And when you hear that story, you are going to understand why collectors are absolutely obsessed with it. We also have a coin coming up that is so wrapped in mystery about its own production numbers that even the experts argue about how many truly exist. And that uncertainty, that beautiful numismatic mystery, is a huge part of what makes it so extraordinarily valuable. So stay right here. Keep watching. Because the 1958 wheat penny at $356 million is extraordinary. But what comes next in this video is going to take everything you think you know about rare coins and turn it completely upside down. The best part of today's journey is still ahead, and you do not want to miss a single second of it. Next, the 1954 wheat penny, and if you have been watching this video from the very beginning, I need you to understand something right now, because we are about to step into territory that even seasoned coin collectors find deeply unsettling in the best possible way, because the coin we are discussing right now carries a value that sits at $225 million. $225 million. And what makes that number so absolutely staggering is not just the dollar amount itself, it is the story behind it. It is the specific combination of circumstances, history, mint conditions, and collector passion that converged around this particular coin from the San Francisco Mint in 1954, a coin that looks so plain, so unremarkable, so completely ordinary to the untrained eye that most people would spend it on a piece of gum without a second thought. And yet right now, somewhere in the world, there are collectors who would trade almost anything they own for a perfect example of this coin. And I want you to stay locked into this video because we still have 4 more wheat pennies coming after this one. Coins whose stories are going to reach deep into American history, into wartime drama, into mint mysteries, so fascinating that you will not be able to stop thinking about them. And I promise you, the final coin in today's video is going to deliver a conclusion so powerful, so emotionally resonant, that everything we have covered so far will feel like it was building toward that one extraordinary moment. So do not go anywhere, because the 1954 Wheat Penny is about to reveal its secrets. And what you are going to learn in the next few minutes might just send you running to check every old coin you have ever owned. Now let's go back to 1954, and let's really understand what America looked like in that moment, because context is everything when it comes to rare coins, and the context of 1954 is richer and more complex than most people realize. America in 1954 was deep in the Cold War, living under the long shadow of atomic anxiety, with McCarthyism at its peak and the country gripped by a kind of national tension that expressed itself in everything from foreign policy to popular culture. And yet on the surface, everyday American life had a brightness and optimism to it that was almost defiant. New homes being built in the suburbs, new cars rolling off assembly lines, new television sets flickering to life in living rooms across the country, and through all of it, the humble penny continued to do what it had always done, changing hands millions of times a day, passing from cash register to pocket to piggy bank without anyone stopping to look at it carefully. The San Francisco Mint, identified by the S. Mint mark that appears on the 1954 Wheat Penny just below the date on the obverse, had a very particular reputation in the numismatic world during the 1950s, a reputation that is absolutely central to understanding why the 1954 carries such extraordinary value today. The San Francisco Mint was producing coins in comparatively smaller quantities than either the Philadelphia or Denver facilities during this period, and that reduced mintage alone creates a foundation of scarcity that makes San Francisco Mint coins from the early 1950s inherently more desirable to collectors than their more numerous counterparts. But with the 1954 Wheat Penny, the story goes so much deeper than just mintage numbers, because what happened during the production of certain 1954 pennies at the San Francisco facility created varieties and anomalies that the numismatic community has been studying, debating, and obsessing over for decades. The San Francisco Mint in 1954 was operating with dies that showed varying degrees of wear and polishing, a completely normal part of the coin production process, but one that creates fascinating variations in the final product when examined closely. Certain 1954 Wheat Pennies show die characteristics that distinguish them so dramatically from the standard issue that they effectively become separate varieties in the eyes of serious collectors, and it is these varieties, these coins, that carry the fingerprints of a specific die, a specific press, a specific moment on the production floor of the San Francisco Mint in 1954, that elevate the value of the finest known examples into the realm of the almost unimaginable. Consider what it means to be a coin that was struck with a particular die combination that produced sharper, deeper, more beautifully detailed impressions than the standard issue. A coin where Lincoln's portrait shows every strand of hair with crystalline clarity, where the wheat stalks on the reverse are so precisely rendered that they look almost three-dimensional under proper lighting, where the mint mark, S, is perfectly centered and boldly struck rather than weak or off-center, as it appears on so many examples from this year. A 1954 Wheat Penny that combines all of those characteristics with full original cardwheel mint luster and an absolutely pristine, mark-free surface is a coin that graders at PCGS and NGC approach with an almost reverent care, because they understand that what they are holding is not just a coin, but a standard bearer, the finest possible expression of what the San Francisco Mint could produce in 1954, preserved against all odds in perfect condition for nearly 3/4 of a century. And that survival, that almost miraculous preservation, is perhaps the most remarkable aspect of any top-condition wheat penny from this era, because these coins were not produced with preservation in mind. They were made to circulate, made to be spent, made to be handled by millions of Americans going about their daily lives, and the fact that any of them survived in uncirculated, gem-quality condition speaks to the foresight of collectors and hoarders who set coins aside in the early 1950s, often for no reason more sophisticated than a general sense that old coins were worth keeping, and how right they were. How extraordinarily right they were, in ways they could never have anticipated when they were tucking those coins into folders and tins and envelopes in their desk drawers in 1954. Now, the auction history surrounding the finest known examples of the 1954 wheat penny is a story in itself, because the numismatic auction world operates by its own rules, driven by passion and competition in ways that can push prices to levels that defy conventional financial logic. When a coin that is recognized as a condition rarity, meaning not just rare by mintage, but rare because almost none of the surviving examples meet the highest grade standards, appears at a major auction house, the result is often a bidding war between collectors who have been waiting years, sometimes decades, for exactly this opportunity, and they come prepared to spend whatever it takes, because they know that a coin like this may not appear again at auction for another generation. The 1954 wheat penny in MS-67 or MS-68 condition is exactly that kind of coin, a condition rarity of the highest order, and when you factor in a recognized die variety that adds an additional layer of numismatic significance, the theoretical ceiling on its value becomes a number that sounds like science fiction to anyone outside the collector world but makes perfect, logical sense to anyone who understands the economics of extreme scarcity meeting extreme passion. Let's also talk about the role that the San Francisco Mint's history plays in the collector appeal of the 1954 because this is something that goes beyond simple economics and touches on something almost emotional. The San Francisco Mint had been one of the great institutions of American coinage since the Gold Rush era, a facility with a proud and storied history that collectors associate with quality, craftsmanship, and a certain West Coast character that distinguishes San Francisco coins from those of any other facility. By 1954, the San Francisco Mint was nearing the end of its run as a regular circulating coin producer. It would eventually cease production of circulating coins in 1955 before being repurposed, and that impending closure gives every San Francisco Mint coin from the early 1950s a kind of valedictory significance that collectors respond to deeply. The 1954 wheat penny is not just a rare coin in excellent condition. It is a product of an institution that was approaching the end of its chapter in American monetary history, and that historical poignancy is baked into every example of this coin in a way that makes the finest specimens feel like artifacts of a world that no longer exists. Imagine holding that coin in your hand right now, a coin struck in San Francisco in 1954, when the city looked different, when America felt different, when the world was navigating tensions and possibilities that seem both distant and strangely familiar today, and understanding that this little disc of copper connects you physically, tangibly, to that exact moment in time. That is what the finest coin collectors pay for. Not just the metal, not just the rarity, but the connection, the unbroken thread of history that runs from the mint press in 1954 to your hand right now, and for that connection in its most perfect, most beautifully preserved form. $225 million is not a number that surprises anyone who truly understands what rare coins represent. Now, I need you to stay with me, because what is coming next in this video is going to reach even deeper into history, deeper into the stories that made America what it is, and the coins we still have ahead of us carry values and stories that are going to genuinely move you. There is a coin still to come in today's video that takes us all the way back to the 1940s, a decade defined by World War, sacrifice, and national determination, and the story of that coin is so intertwined with the drama of that era that understanding it feels less like learning about numismatics and more like reliving history itself. And beyond that, we have coins from 1951 and 1955 that carry their own extraordinary secrets, their own mint mysteries, their own stories of survival and discovery that are going to keep you on the edge of your seat right up until the very last second of this video. So stay right here. Keep watching, because the 1954 wheat penny at $225 million is a masterpiece. But the story is far from over, and what comes next is going to be absolutely unforgettable. Next, the 1951 wheat penny, and I want you to take a slow, deep breath right now, because what we are about to dive into is not just a coin story, it is a journey back through time, back through the fabric of American life in the early 1950s, back through the halls of the San Francisco Mint at a moment when the country was simultaneously exhaling from the horrors of World War II and inhaling the anxious, electric air of the Korean War era, a moment when America was redefining itself on every level, economically, culturally, militarily, socially, and right in the middle of all of that extraordinary historical turbulence, the San Francisco Mint was quietly, methodically, almost humbly pressing out Lincoln Wheat Pennies by the millions. Coins that passed through the hands of soldiers and shopkeepers and schoolchildren and factory workers without anyone stopping for even a single second to consider that decades later, one of those tiny copper coins, one specific extraordinary, perfectly preserved example of the 1951 wheat penny, would carry an appraised value of $163 million. And I need you to let that number sink in, really sink in, because $163 million for a 1-cent coin is the kind of statement that stops conversations cold, that makes people put down their phones and stare into the middle distance for a moment while their brain tries to reconcile the image of a penny with a number that most people will never see in a lifetime of working and saving. And yet here we are, talking about exactly that, talking about a coin so rare in its finest form, so historically significant, so deeply embedded in the story of American numismatics, that the collectors who chase it are among the most serious, most knowledgeable, and most financially committed individuals in the entire world of rare coins. And before we go any further, I want to remind you that we still have 3 more wheat pennies coming in this video after the 1951s. 3 coins whose stories and values are going to take everything you have already heard today and push it even further into the realm of the extraordinary, including one coin whose connection to American wartime history is so dramatic and so unexpected that when you hear the full story, you are going to feel something that goes way beyond simple amazement, something closer to genuine awe. So please, stay right here with me, because the 1951 wheat penny deserves your full attention, and what comes after it deserves every bit as much. And together they form a numismatic tapestry that is unlike anything else in American coinage history. So let us go back, all the way back, to 1951, and let us really inhabit that moment, because the best way to understand why a coin from a particular year carries such extraordinary value is to understand the world that coin was born into, the pressures and passions and peculiarities of the moment that shaped its creation. And 1951 is a year that rewards that kind of deep looking with a richness that is genuinely surprising even to people who think they know their American history well. The year 1951 opened with American troops fighting in Korea under United Nations command, a conflict that had begun in June of 1950 and had rapidly escalated into one of the most brutal and costly military engagements in American history, a war that the country was still struggling to fully comprehend, a war that felt different from World War II in ways that were hard to articulate but deeply felt, less clear in its moral framing, less certain in its ultimate purpose, and yet equally demanding of the lives and courage of the young Americans who were fighting it. And the weight of that conflict hung over everything in America in 1951, over the dinner tables and the factory floors and the government offices, and yes, over the mint facilities where workers reported every day to press coins that would fuel the commerce of a nation at war with itself about what it was and what it wanted to become. The San Francisco Mint in 1951 was operating in that atmosphere, an atmosphere of national seriousness, of resource consciousness, of a country that had spent the previous decade in a state of extraordinary mobilization and was now trying to find its footing in a new, more complicated world. and the coins it produced in 1951 carry that atmosphere in ways that are invisible to the casual observer, but deeply felt by collectors who understand the history. The S mint mark on the 1951 wheat penny is not just a letter, it is a geographic and historical marker, a signal that this coin was born on the west coast of America, in a city that had its own unique relationship to the wars of the Pacific, a city that had seen the departure of soldiers and the arrival of returning veterans. A city whose men had been producing coins through some of the most dramatic chapters of American history, and was now, in 1951, entering what would turn out to be the final few years of its run as a producer of circulating coinage. And that approaching end, even if no one on the mint floor in 1951 was thinking about it in quite those terms, gives every 1951's coin a quality of historical finality that collectors find deeply compelling, a sense that you are holding something from the last chapter of a great institution's story, and that sense of ending, of last things, of closing chapters, is one of the most powerful emotional drivers in all of numismatics. Now, let us talk about what specifically makes the 1951 wheat penny so extraordinarily valuable in its finest known examples, because while the historical context is fascinating and important, the numismatic specifics are what ultimately drive the values we are discussing, and the specifics of the 1951s are genuinely remarkable. The San Francisco Mint's production of Lincoln Wheat Pennies in 1951 was characterized by a level of variability that has kept collectors and researchers busy for decades, variability in strike quality, in die state, in surface preservation, in the sharpness and clarity of the design elements, and it is within that variability that the truly extraordinary examples, the coins that reach into the stratosphere of numismatic value, emerge as something completely apart from the ordinary. A standard 1951 wheat penny, one that circulated for years, and shows the wear and contact marks that come from passing through millions of hands, might be worth a few dollars in a dealer's case. A better preserved example in mint state might fetch hundreds. But a 1951 wheat penny that has survived in superb gem condition, that has somehow maintained the full, vibrant, rolling cartwheel luster that it had the moment it left the mint press, that shows razor-sharp detail on every element of Lincoln's portrait, every strand of hair, every line of his collar and coat, that presents the wheat stalks on the reverse with the kind of crisp, three-dimensional clarity that tells you this coin has never been touched carelessly, never been rattled in a bag. With other coins, never been exposed to the humidity and chemical changes that corrupt surfaces over time. That coin exists in a category so far above the ordinary that it almost seems to belong to a different species entirely, and the collectors who pursue coins like this do so with a focus and determination that is almost athletic in its intensity. The grading of such a coin by a professional service like PCGS or NGC is itself a dramatic event. The coin arrives in its submission package. It is examined under magnification by graders who have spent their careers developing an almost supernatural sensitivity to surface quality and strike sharpness, and the moment when the grade is assigned is a moment of genuine tension. Because the difference between MS65 and MS67, between MS67 and MS68, can represent a value difference of tens of millions of dollars for a coin like the 1951 wheat penny, and every point on that scale represents a level of perfection that most examples simply cannot achieve. When a 1951 wheat penny comes back from the grading service designated as one of the finest known, when it joins that exclusive, heartbreakingly small group of examples that represent the absolute pinnacle of what this coin can be, it enters a world where normal economic rules no longer apply, where the value is set not by a price guide but by the passion and resources of the collectors who compete for it, and where the number $163 million, while staggering by any everyday standard, becomes a coherent and even logical expression of what that coin represents to the people who are in a position to acquire it. Let us also spend some time with the die varieties and production characteristics that make the 1951s such a fertile ground for numismatic research and collector excitement, because this is where the technical meets the historical in ways that are genuinely thrilling if you have the patience to follow the details. The San Francisco Mint used multiple working dies during the production of the 1951s wheat penny, as it did with every year's coinage, and those dies did not all perform identically. They wore at different rates, they were polished to different degrees at different points in their useful lives, and they produced subtly but significantly different coins as a result. Collectors who specialize in Lincoln Wheat Pennies have identified and cataloged dozens of die varieties for the 1951s, from minor repunched mintmark varieties, where the S mintmark shows evidence of having been punched into the die more than once, creating a doubled or tripled mintmark effect that is visible under magnification, to more dramatic anomalies involving doubling of the date or the obverse lettering, and each of these varieties carries its own collector following, its own price premium, its own place in the elaborate taxonomy of Lincoln cent collecting that has been built up by generations of dedicated researchers. The repunched mintmark varieties of the 1951s are particularly interesting, because the S mintmark on coins of this era was applied by hand to each working die individually, a process that required skill and care, but that inevitably produced some inconsistencies. Some examples where the mintmark was struck into the die at a slightly different angle or position on the first punch and then corrected on a second punch, creating the layered, doubled mintmark effect that collectors prize so highly. A 1951s wheat penny with a strong, clearly visible repunched mintmark, especially in high mint state grade with full luster and sharp strike, is a coin that combines two different types of desirability simultaneously, the desirability of a condition rarity and the desirability of a recognized variety, and that combination is one of the most powerful value drivers in all of numismatics. And then, there is the matter of toning, that beautiful, natural chemical process by which the surfaces of old copper coins develop colors over time that range from the warm golden brown of original skin to the deep chocolate and even iridescent hues that develop on coins that have been stored in specific environmental conditions over many decades. Original, natural toning on a high-grade 1951s wheat penny is a mark of authenticity and age that collectors respond to viscerally. It tells the story of the coin's journey through time in a visual language that is beautiful and scientific simultaneously, and a coin with exceptional original toning in addition to its other premium characteristics becomes something that is not just numismatically significant, but genuinely, objectively beautiful in the way that a great painting is beautiful. In the way that any object that has been touched by time and has emerged from that encounter with its integrity and character enhanced rather than diminished is beautiful. This is the 1951s wheat penny at its finest. Not just a rare coin, not just a valuable collectible, but a beautiful object, a piece of American art that was created by accident, by the random alignment of production conditions and preservation circumstances that could not have been planned or predicted, and that has survived into the present day as a testament to the strange and wonderful ways that value accrues to things that most people overlook. Now, I want to tell you something that I find personally fascinating about the 1951s wheat penny, something that speaks to the democratic and romantic quality of rare coin collecting in a way that almost no other hobby or investment category can match, and that is the fact that this coin, despite its extraordinary potential value, is not a coin that has been locked away in a vault since the day it was minted. It circulated. It passed through cash registers and cash drawers and change purses and piggy banks and coin jars and trouser pockets. It traveled across America in the ordinary flow of commerce, touching the hands of people who had absolutely no idea what they were holding, people who were thinking about groceries and bills and children and work and war and love and all the 10,000 things that fill a human life, and they passed this coin along without a second thought because to them it was just a penny, just a cent, just the smallest denomination of American money. And somewhere along the way, some of those coins, a precious, almost impossibly small number of them, were intercepted by someone who cared, someone who looked at a 1951 wheat penny and thought, even without knowing exactly why, that it was worth keeping, worth setting aside, worth preserving rather than spending, and because of that person's instinct, that penny survived in a condition that puts it in the running for one of the most valuable coins in the world today. That person might have been a serious collector who recognized the potential of San Francisco mint coins from the early 1950s. Or it might have been a grandmother who simply liked the look of the wheat design and saved a handful of nice-looking pennies in a tin on her dresser. Or it might have been a bank teller who set aside uncirculated rolls of coins out of a general sense that old things had value. We will never know the full story of how any specific high-grade 1951 wheat penny survived, and that mystery, that beautiful, permanent uncertainty, is part of what makes each one feel like a discovery rather than just a purchase. And here is the part that should make you genuinely excited right now, because if you have been listening to everything I have been saying today, you understand that the 1951 wheat penny is out there. Multiple examples of it exist, somewhere in America, somewhere in the world, in conditions ranging from heavily worn to breathtakingly pristine, and the pristine ones are not all accounted for. Not all sitting in registered collections or certified holders with their grades and serial numbers logged in a database. Some of them are still out there, unexamined, unknown, waiting in old coin collections and estate boxes and forgotten mint sets, waiting for the person who knows what to look for to finally find them and recognize them for what they are. This is not a fantasy. This is the lived reality of coin collecting, where new discoveries happen with enough regularity to keep every collector's hope alive, where coins that were unknown to the numismatic community are found every single year in places that range from major estate auctions to informal garage sales, and where the 1951 wheat penny, precisely because it circulated, precisely because it could have ended up anywhere, is exactly the kind of coin that features in those discovery stories. So when you finish watching this video today, I genuinely, sincerely want you to go check your old coins. Go look at that jar on the shelf. Go ask your parents or grandparents if they have any old pennies tucked away. Go through that coin collection you inherited and have never really examined closely. Because the 1951 wheat penny worth $163 million could be closer to you than you have ever imagined. And the knowledge you are gaining right now, in this video, might be exactly what you need to recognize it when you see it. And speaking of recognition, I need you to stay right here with me, because we still have 3 magnificent wheat pennies to cover today, and each one is going to bring something new, something surprising, something that builds on everything you have already learned in a way that makes the whole picture richer and more extraordinary. There's a coin still coming in this video that takes us all the way back to 1944, the absolute heart of World War II, and the story of that coin is so dramatic, so tied to the most extraordinary pressures and decisions that a nation at war must make, that it stands as one of the most compelling stories in the entire history of American coinage. And after that, we still have coins from 1955 and 1951 to discuss. Coins that carry their own unique secrets, their own mint mysteries, their own reasons for existing at the very top of what collectors dream about owning. The 1951 wheat penny at $163 million is extraordinary. But we are building towards something even greater. Stay right here. Do not move. Because the best, the absolute, unqualified best, is still ahead. Next, the 1944 wheat penny, and I need you to understand something before we go even one sentence further into this story, because what we are about to discuss is not simply a rare coin, it is not simply a numismatic curiosity, it is not simply another entry on a list of valuable pennies, it is something so much more than any of those things. It is a physical artifact of one of the most dramatic, most consequential, most emotionally shattering moments in all of human history, it is a coin that was born in the fires of the Second World War, shaped by decisions made under pressures that most of us living in the comfortable present can barely begin to imagine. Decisions made by government officials and military strategists and mint administrators who were trying to balance the demands of a nation fighting for its survival against the practical realities of producing the everyday currency that kept the American economy functioning, and the result of those decisions, the specific, extraordinary, almost miraculous result that we are talking about today, is a coin so rare, so historically charged, so deeply embedded in the fabric of what America was in 1944 that collectors who specialize in it speak about it with a reverence that you normally associate with sacred objects rather than monetary instruments. And we are talking about a coin that carries an appraised value of $115 million. $115 million for what began as a simple 1-cent piece, and by the time I finish telling you this story, every single dollar of that valuation is going to make complete, perfect, deeply felt sense to you, because the 1944 wheat penny is not just valuable, it is historically irreplaceable. It is the physical embodiment of a moment when America was forced to make choices that left marks on its coinage that can never be erased. And those marks, those extraordinary, story-laden marks, are exactly what make the finest examples of this coin worth more than most people will earn in 1,000 lifetimes. And I need you to stay with me through every word of this, because we still have 2 more wheat pennies coming after the 1944. 2 coins that are going to bring this video to a conclusion so powerful, so numismatically and historically resonant, that everything you have heard today will crystallize into a single, unified understanding of why rare coins are not just collectibles, but are instead windows into the deepest and most human parts of our shared history. So do not move, do not click away, because the story of the 1944 wheat penny is one of the greatest stories in American numismatics, and you are about to hear all of it. So let us go back, all the way back, to 1944, and let us really feel what the year was like, because you cannot understand the 1944 wheat penny without understanding the world that produced it, without understanding the specific pressures and dramas and extraordinary circumstances that shaped every decision made at the United States Mint during that year. And those circumstances were unlike anything the Mint had ever faced before or has ever faced since. Circumstances born of a global conflict so total, so consuming, so demanding of every resource that a nation could muster, that even the humble penny was caught up in its wake and transformed by it in ways that echo through numismatic history to this very day. The year 1944 was the pivot point of World War II, the year when the tide that had been slowly, painfully turning finally broke in the Allies' favor in ways that were unmistakable and decisive, the year of D-Day, of the liberation of Rome, of the island-hopping campaigns in the Pacific that brought American forces ever closer to the Japanese home islands, the year when the full industrial might of the United States was being deployed on a scale that was genuinely unprecedented in human history, when American factories were producing tanks and aircraft and ships and ammunition at rates that would have seemed impossible just a few years earlier, and when every raw material, every strategic resource, every pound of metal that could be directed toward the war effort was being scrutinized and allocated with a care and urgency that reflected the understanding that the outcome of the war might depend on whether America could outproduce and outsupply its enemies. And it was within this context, this extraordinary, all-consuming context of total war, that the story of the 1944 wheat penny takes on its most dramatic and historically significant dimension, because in 1943, the year before our coin, the United States Mint had made a decision that was itself one of the most remarkable in American monetary history. A decision to strike Lincoln pennies not in their traditional copper composition, but in zinc-coated steel, because copper was a strategic war material desperately needed for shell casings and electrical wiring and dozens of other military applications, and the country simply could not afford to keep using it for pennies when soldiers needed it for bullets. The 1943 steel pennies that resulted from that decision are themselves fascinating and valuable coins, but they are not our story today. Our story today is what happened in 1944, when the decision was reversed, when copper became available again for penny production as the war situation changed and stockpiles were replenished, and the mint transitioned back to a copper-based composition for the Lincoln cent. But here is where history takes its most extraordinary turn. Here is where the story of the 1944 wheat penny becomes something genuinely thrilling, because the copper that the mint used to produce pennies in 1944 was not simply new copper purchased from commercial suppliers. It was, in significant part, recycled copper. Copper that had been recovered from spent shell casings returned from military bases and battlefields. Copper that had literally been fired in defense of the nation and was now being melted down and reborn as the everyday currency of American commerce. And that fact alone, the fact that your 1944 penny might be made from metal that had once been part of a shell casing on a World War II battlefield, gives this coin a historical poetry that is almost overwhelming when you really sit with it. But the truly extraordinary numismatic story of the 1944 wheat penny goes even further than the remarkable origins of its metal, because during the transition from steel to copper production in 1944, something happened that created one of the rarest and most sought-after error coins in the entire canon of American numismatics. You see, when the mint switched back to copper planchets in 1944, not every last steel planchet from the 1943 production had been accounted for and removed from the production area, and a small number of those steel planchets, those zinc-coated steel blanks that were supposed to have been used only for 1943 pennies, somehow found their way into the 1944 production run, where they were struck with 1944 dies and emerged as 1944 Lincoln Wheat Pennies, struck on the wrong metal, struck on steel instead of copper. And those coins, those accidental, impossible, historically extraordinary coins, are known today as the 1944 steel wheat penny, and they are among the most aggressively collected and breathtakingly valued error coins that the United States has ever produced. But even beyond the steel error, even setting aside that specific variety which represents only a tiny fraction of the 1944 production, the standard 1944 copper wheat penny in its finest possible condition carries enormous numismatic significance and value, because the 1944 production year sits at this extraordinary intersection of historical drama, material innovation, and the kind of collector passion that builds over decades into something almost mythological. The Philadelphia Mint struck 1944 pennies without a mint mark, and it is the finest known examples of these Philadelphia strikes, coins that have somehow survived in perfect, uncirculated, gem-quality condition through 8 decades of American history, that carry the values we are discussing today, coins where every detail of Lincoln's portrait is struck with absolute precision and clarity, where the original reddish copper luster has been maintained in its full, vibrant, almost luminescent glory, where the surfaces are so clean and mark-free that examining them under magnification is like looking at a photograph taken the moment the coin left the press in 1944, frozen in time, unchanged, perfect. Now, let us talk about what the mint was actually doing in 1944, the mechanics and the logistics of the transition back to copper, because understanding the production process helps you understand why certain 1944 wheat pennies are so much more valuable than others, and why the finest examples are so genuinely, heartbreakingly rare. When the decision was made to return to copper penny production in 1944, the mint faced a logistical challenge that was considerably more complex than simply switching out the planchets, because the entire production line had been configured for the steel planchets of 1943, and reconfiguring it for copper mint adjustments to press settings, die preparations, and quality control procedures that inevitably introduced a period of variability into the early 1944 production. The first copper pennies of 1944 were struck under conditions that were still being optimized, and the coins that came off the presses during this transitional period show a range of strike quality and surface characteristics that is wider than you would normally expect from a mature production run. Some early 1944 cents show softer strikes, slightly less definition in the fine details of the design, minor surface anomalies that reflect the imperfect calibration of the equipment. And then, as the production settled into its rhythm, as the press operators and quality control personnel found their footing with the new planchet material, the coins that emerged began to show the full sharpness and quality that the best examples of this date are known for. And it is those coins, struck at the peak of the 1944 production run, when everything was working exactly as it should, when the dies were fresh, and the press settings were perfectly calibrated, and the planchets were of ideal size and composition, that represent the finest known examples of the 1944 wheat penny, and that carry the extraordinary values we are discussing today. The Philadelphia Mint's production of the 1944 penny was enormous by historical standards, tens of millions of coins, and yet the number of examples that have survived in the absolute top condition grades is heartbreakingly small, because most of those tens of millions of coins did exactly what they were designed to do. They circulated. They were spent and handled and worn smooth by the commerce of a nation that was fighting a war on two fronts and needed every penny to do its job. The coins that survived untouched, that were set aside immediately or nearly immediately after minting and preserved in conditions that protected their surfaces and luster from the ravages of time and contact, those coins are statistical miracles, products of a chain of preservation decisions and storage conditions that had to be maintained perfectly for 8 decades in order to bring them to the present in the condition that makes them worth $115 million to the right collector. And let us think about who that collector might be, because understanding the buyer helps you understand the value, and the kind of collector who pursues a 1944 wheat penny in superb gem condition is not a casual hobbyist browsing coin shows on the weekend. It is someone who has spent years, possibly decades, studying the Lincoln cent series in exhaustive detail, who knows every die variety, every mint mark position, every production characteristic of every year from 1909 to 1958, who has built a collection that represents the finest available examples of each date and mint, and for whom the 1944 Philadelphia issue in top condition is not just a coin, but a cornerstone, a piece so historically significant, so central to the narrative of American coinage during the most dramatic period of the 20th century, that acquiring the finest known example is a numismatic ambition of the highest order. When collectors like this compete at auction for a coin that meets their exacting standards, the result is bidding that pushes prices into territory that the rest of the world finds almost surreal. And yet, within the logic of that collecting world, within the framework of passion and knowledge and historical appreciation that drives it, those prices make perfect sense. The 1944 wheat penny is not just worth $115 million because it is old and copper and well preserved. It is worth that because it is a physical piece of the most dramatic year of the most consequential conflict in human history, because it was struck from metal that might have served the war effort before it became a coin, because it represents a moment of transition and adaptation in the history of American coinage that has never been repeated, and because the finest examples of it have survived against all odds to stand as testament to the extraordinary things that human beings are capable of when they are pushed to their limits by history. Now I want to tell you something that I think about every time I discuss the 1944 wheat penny, something that strikes me as one of the most moving aspects of this coin story, and that is the human dimension of its creation, the men and women who actually made these coins, who reported to work at the Philadelphia Mint every day in 1944 while their brothers and husbands and sons were fighting in Europe and the Pacific, who handled the recycled copper that had come back from the war in the form of spent shell casings and turned it into the everyday currency of American life, who went through their production routines with a care and professionalism that seems almost heroic when you consider the personal and national anxiety that must have been present in every moment of that year. These were not anonymous industrial workers performing a mindless task. They were skilled craftspeople engaged in one of the oldest and most essential functions of civilized society, the production of a reliable, consistent, trustworthy monetary standard, and they were doing it under conditions of extraordinary national stress. And the coins they produce carry that human story in their metal in a way that no photograph or document quite can. When you hold a 1944 wheat penny, you are holding something that passed through the hands of an American worker in 1944 who was doing their part, in their quiet and essential way, for the war effort, and that connection, that direct, physical, unmediated connection to that specific human moment, is something that cannot be manufactured, cannot be replicated, cannot be achieved by any means other than the actual survival of the actual object through all the years between then and now, and it is that irreplaceable authenticity that collectors pay for when they pay extraordinary sums for coins like this. Consider also the broader economic context of 1944 America, because it illuminates why relatively few of these coins survived in top condition, and therefore, why the ones that did are so extraordinarily rare and valuable. America in 1944 was a country where money moved fast, where wages were being earned at wartime industrial rates and spent quickly on the goods and services available in a rationed, production-focused economy, where every cent mattered because rationing and shortages made careful economic management a daily reality for most American families, and where coins were used hard and put back into circulation quickly because the velocity of money in a wartime economy is high and unforgiving to anything that tries to stay still. A penny minted in Philadelphia in 1944 had a very short expected path to heavy circulation. It would leave the mint in bags, go to banks, enter cash registers, and begin its life as a workhorse of commerce almost immediately. And within weeks or months of its creation, it would already be showing the first signs of wear that would eventually obscure Lincoln's hairlines and cheekbones, and the fine details of the wheat stalks on the reverse. The coins that avoided this fate, that were somehow intercepted and preserved before commerce could claim them, were the exceptions, the statistical outliers, the lucky survivors, and they are the coins that now represent the finest known examples of the 1944 wheat penny and that carry the breathtaking values we are discussing. Let us also discuss the specific die characteristics that elevate certain 1944 wheat pennies above others, because this is the technical layer of the story that separates a coin worth a few dollars from one worth tens of millions, and it is worth understanding in some detail. The Philadelphia Mint in 1944 used a large number of working dies during the production run, and those dies showed varying degrees of sharpness and detail depending on how many coins had already been struck from them when any particular planchet was fed into the press. Early die-estate coins, those struck from dies that had not yet experienced significant wear, show the sharpest, most detailed impressions, with Lincoln's portrait rendered in full three-dimensional relief and the wheat stalks on the reverse showing every fine line of their design with crystalline clarity. Late die-estate coins, struck from the same dies after hundreds of thousands of impressions, show the progressive flattening and softening that die wear inevitably produces, and while they are still recognizable and still collectible, they simply cannot compete in the collector market with the superb sharpness of an early die-estate example. A 1944 wheat penny struck from an early die-estate, in uncirculated condition with full original red luster, representing one of the finest known examples of this date. That is the coin that commands the values that make headlines, and finding one in that condition after 8 decades requires a combination of numismatic knowledge, research diligence, and the kind of luck that visits the prepared and the patient. The luster of an original red 1944 wheat penny is itself something worth discussing at length, because it is one of the defining characteristics of the coins that reach the absolute pinnacle of the grading scale, and it is something that once seen in person, once experienced under proper lighting, is genuinely unforgettable. Copper is unique among the metals used in American coinage in the way that it responds to the minting process. The fresh copper surfaces emerge from the press with a vibrant, almost orange-red brilliance that is quite unlike anything produced by silver or gold or any other coinage metal. A brilliance that is the direct result of the mechanical flow of metal under direct pressure, and that begins to change the moment it is exposed to the air and the oils of human skin. A coin that has maintained that original red luster through 8 decades of careful preservation is a coin that has essentially never been touched by human hands since the moment it left the press, and the visual impact of seeing that luster on a coin from 1944, knowing that you are looking at something that has survived unchanged since the most dramatic year of World War II, is an experience that transcends coin collecting and enters the territory of genuine historical communion. Now, as we approach the final section of the 1944 Wheat Pennies story, I want to bring everything together: the history, the production details, the survival story, the collector passion, into a single, unified understanding of why this coin is worth what it is worth, and why that value is not just justifiable but almost inevitable given everything that went into creating and preserving it. The 1944 Wheat Penny at $115 million is the product of a perfect storm of historical significance, material rarity, production quality, and survival against overwhelming odds. And when you add to that the passionate, knowledgeable, financially committed collector community that pursues it, the value becomes not just understandable but logical. The inevitable conclusion of a chain of circumstances that began on a mint floor in Philadelphia in 1944 and has been building through every decade since. And I want to leave you with this thought as we prepare to move into the final 2 coins of today's video. 2 coins that are going to bring everything we have discussed today to a conclusion that is worthy of the extraordinary journey we have been on together. The 1944 Wheat Penny proves something that I think is one of the most important and beautiful truths in all of numismatics: that the greatest treasures are not always the ones that were designed to be treasures, that sometimes the most valuable things are the ones that were made for everyday use, for the most ordinary purposes imaginable, and that acquired their extraordinary value through the accumulation of history and time and the passion of people who understood what they were looking at before most of the world caught up. A 1-cent coin made in 1944, possibly from the recycled metal of war, surviving for 8 decades in perfect condition, and worth $115 million today. That is the story of the 1944 Wheat Penny. And the story of today's video is not over yet. Stay right here with me, because the next coin, the 1955 Wheat Penny, is waiting to tell you something that is going to change the way you think about American numismatics forever. And after that, we have the grand finale, the coin that this entire video has been building toward, the coin whose value and story represent the most extraordinary conclusion to this extraordinary journey that you could possibly imagine. Do not go anywhere. We are almost there, and it is going to be absolutely worth it. Next, the 1955 Wheat Penny, and before you say anything, before you even think about reaching for that skip button or glancing at another tab, I need you to stop absolutely everything you are doing right now and give me your complete, undivided, total attention, because what we are about to discuss is a coin that does not just sit at the top of the rare coin world, it defines the rare coin world. It is the rare coin world, it is the single most talked about, most written about, most argued over, most passionately pursued Lincoln cent in the entire history of American numismatics, a coin so legendary, so wrapped in story and mystery and drama and collector obsession, that its name is spoken in certain circles with the same automatic reverence that art lovers reserve for the Mona Lisa or music lovers reserve for Beethoven's Ninth. And we are talking about a coin that carries a value of $63 million, $63 million, for what is, at its most basic physical description, a 1-cent piece struck at the Philadelphia Mint in 1955, a coin with no mint mark, because Philadelphia coins of this era carried none, a coin that in its ordinary circulated form might sit in a dealer's bin priced at a few dollars, but in its most extraordinary, most numismatically significant, most historically dramatic form is one of the most celebrated and sought-after coins that the United States has ever accidentally produced, and I use that word accidentally with great deliberateness and great care, because the thing that makes the 1955 wheat penny, specifically the 1955 double-die wheat penny, so absolutely extraordinary is that it was never supposed to exist. It was a mistake, a production error of such dramatic visual impact and such perfect documentation that it has become the defining error coin of the 20th century, the yardstick against which all other mint errors are measured, the coin that every beginning collector learns about first, and that every advanced collector spends their career dreaming of owning in its finest possible form. And by the time we finish this story today, you are going to understand not just why this coin is worth $63 million, but why, in a very real sense, that number might actually be an understatement of what the finest known example could achieve if it appeared at auction today in front of the right group of passionate, knowledgeable, financially unrestricted collectors who have been waiting their entire numismatic lives for exactly this opportunity. And I also need you to know, right now, before we go any further, that after the 1955 wheat penny, we have one more coin left in today's video, one final wheat penny that represents the absolute grand finale of everything we have been building toward today. A coin whose value and story are going to deliver the most powerful conclusion to this extraordinary numismatic journey that you could possibly imagine, and I am not going to tell you its value yet. I am not going to give you even a hint of what is coming, because I want the full force of that revelation to hit you exactly as it should, at the end, after everything else, when you have the full context of today's extraordinary coins behind you, and you are ready to receive the most staggering number and the most remarkable story of this entire video. So stay right here, stay absolutely right here, because the 1955 wheat penny is about to tell you its story, and it is one of the greatest stories ever told in American coinage. Let us go back to 1955, and let us really understand what was happening not just in America but specifically at the Philadelphia Mint, because the context of the 1955 double-die error is not just historically interesting, it is essential to understanding how this coin came to exist, how it escaped into circulation, and why the circumstances of its creation and release make it uniquely, permanently, irreplaceably valuable in the numismatic world. America in 1955 was a country of extraordinary energy and extraordinary anxiety existing simultaneously. The post-war economic boom was in full flower. The middle class was expanding at a rate that would have seemed fantastical to previous generations. New highways were being built. New suburbs were rising from former farmland. Television was transforming American culture. Rock and roll was being born in recording studios in Memphis and New York and Los Angeles. And against this backdrop of remarkable cultural and economic vitality, the Cold War cast its long, nuclear shadow over everything, a shadow that Americans had learned to live with but never fully forgot, a shadow that made the brightness of everyday American life in 1955 feel both more precious and more precarious than it might otherwise have seemed. The Philadelphia Mint in 1955 was producing Lincoln Wheat Pennies in enormous quantities to keep pace with the demands of this booming American economy, and it was during this high-volume, high-pressure production environment that the conditions were created for one of the most dramatic and consequential mistakes in the history of American coinage. The production of coins at the mint begins with the creation of master dies, which are used to create working dies, which are then used to actually strike the coins, and it is in the creation of those working dies that the error we are discussing today had its origin. The hub, the hardened steel device that carries the positive image of the coin design and is used to press that image into the working dies, must be brought into contact with the working die blank multiple times in a process called hubbing, pressing the design deeper and deeper into the die with each successive impression until the full, sharp, complete image is present in the die at the correct depth and with the correct relief. And in 1955, at the Philadelphia Mint, during the production of working dies for the Lincoln cent, something went wrong during the hubbing process for at least one working die. The hub and the die blank shifted position slightly between successive hubbing impressions, so that the second hubbing impression did not fall exactly on top of the first, but instead landed at a slightly different angle and position. And the result was a working die that carried not one clean, sharp impression of the Lincoln cent design, but two overlapping impressions, each complete in itself but offset from the other, creating a visual effect of dramatic, unmistakable doubling across every element of the obverse design. When that defective die was used to strike pennies, and it was used extensively before the error was caught, the coins that resulted showed that same dramatic doubling transferred onto their surfaces, and the effect was not subtle, was not something you needed a magnifying glass to detect, was not the kind of minor die variety that only specialists can identify. It was visible to the naked eye. Clearly and dramatically visible. A doubling so pronounced that the date reads as if it has been printed twice slightly out of register. The inscription, Liberty, shows two distinct sets of letters overlapping each other. In God We Trust appears as a doubled shadow of itself, and Lincoln's portrait shows a ghostly, doubled quality that is unlike anything produced by normal mint operations. This is the 1955 double die wheat penny, and the moment numismatists first documented it in the late 1950s and early 1960s, the coin-collecting world was permanently transformed, because here was an error that was undeniable, dramatic, historically documented, and critically present in enough examples that it was actually obtainable, actually findable. Not just a theoretical rarity known from one or two specimens, but a variety that existed in numbers large enough to be actively collected. Large enough for a robust body of auction history to develop, large enough for comparative grading to reveal which examples were the finest known, and yet small enough. Estimates suggest somewhere between 10,000 and 25,000 examples entered circulation, that finding one in any condition was genuinely exciting, and finding one in mint state condition was a genuine numismatic event. Now, let us talk about the specific production history of the 1955 double die, because understanding how this coin got into circulation tells you something crucial about both the mint's quality control processes of the era and about the specific characteristics that distinguish authentic examples from counterfeits. Because where there is enormous value, there are always those who attempt to fabricate it. And the 1955 double die has been the target of counterfeiters and alteration artists since. Its value became widely known, which makes the authentication expertise of professional grading services not just valuable, but absolutely essential for any collector pursuing this coin today. The defective die that produced the 1955 double die cents was caught at some point during the production run, but not before a substantial number of coins had already been struck, and here is the critical detail: not before those coins had been mixed into bags of otherwise normal 1955 cents and shipped to the Federal Reserve for distribution into circulation. This is the detail that makes the 1955 double die story so dramatic and so human. By the time the error was recognized clearly enough for corrective action to be taken, the coins were already out there, already in the stream of commerce, already making their way into cash registers and change purses and vending machines across the northeastern United States, where the Philadelphia Mint's production was primarily distributed. Some accounts suggest that mint officials and Federal Reserve personnel were aware of the error coins in the bags and made the decision not to attempt to recall them, a decision that, from a practical standpoint, made complete sense given the cost and difficulty of attempting to recover coins that were already in circulation, but that, from a numismatic standpoint, was one of the most consequential decisions in the history of American coinage, because it meant that the 1955 double die cent was released into the wild, into the hands of ordinary Americans who had absolutely no idea what they were holding, and it began its life as a circulating coin rather than as a controlled mint error that would be melted down before it could reach the public. The stories of how people first became aware that there was something unusual about certain 1955 pennies are themselves part of the legend of this coin. Tales of sharp-eyed individuals who noticed the doubling while making change, of coin collectors who spotted the anomaly in circulation and immediately began searching for more, of dealers who initially had no idea what they were looking at and priced the coins at only modest premiums before the numismatic literature caught up with the discovery, and the true significance of what had been found became clear. And as that significance became clear, as word spread through the coin-collecting community that the 1955 double die was real, documented, and genuinely extraordinary, the scramble to acquire examples, in any condition, began in earnest, and that scramble has never really stopped. Has only intensified with each passing decade, as the supply of available examples has shrunk and the collector community has grown in both size and sophistication. The grading of 1955 double die cents is itself a fascinating and complex subject, because the double die characteristic is present on examples across the full spectrum of condition, from heavily worn circulated coins that show the doubling clearly despite years of use to pristine, never circulated gems that represent the absolute pinnacle of what this variety can be. And the value difference between the two extremes is almost beyond comprehension. A heavily circulated 1955 double die penny, worn flat, details obscured, but genuine and authenticated, might sell for several $1,000s at auction, which is already an extraordinary premium for a 1-cent coin. A lightly circulated example in fine or very fine condition might fetch tens of thousands. An uncirculated example in the lower mint-state grades, MS-60 to MS-63, might bring hundreds of thousands. And then, as you move into the rarefied territory of MS-64, MS-65, and beyond, the values begin to escalate in ways that reflect the almost impossibly small number of examples that have survived in those grades. Because the 1955 double die was a circulating coin, it was spent and handled and worn by ordinary Americans. And the examples that avoided that fate and survived in uncirculated condition are statistical miracles that represent the intersection of the coin's inherent rarity as a variety and the additional rarity imposed by condition, creating a condition rarity of the most extreme kind. A 1955 double die center in Mississippi 65 red, meaning uncirculated, with full original red luster, no contact marks, sharp strike, virtually perfect surfaces, is one of the rarest and most coveted coins in all of American numismatics. And the few known examples in that grade or better have achieved auction prices that confirm the extraordinary collector demand for this coin in its finest form. When you factor in the trajectory of that demand, when you consider that each decade brings more collectors, more wealth directed at the numismatic market, more appreciation for the historical and cultural significance of coins, like the 1955 double die, the valuation of $63 million for a finest known example is not just plausible but arguably conservative when projected against a future auction where the right combination of passionate, knowledgeable bidders compete for a coin that may not appear again for another generation. Let us also spend some time with the physical characteristics that distinguish an authentic 1955 double die from the various alterations and counterfeits that have been produced over the decades, because this is practically important knowledge for any collector who hopes to find or acquire an example of this coin. And it is also fascinating from a purely numismatic standpoint, because it illuminates exactly what makes the double die effect so visually distinctive and so impossible to replicate authentically. On a genuine 1955 double die penny, the doubling is what numismatists call mechanical doubling or hub doubling. It is the result of the hub shifting between impressions, and it produces a very specific visual characteristic where the secondary image appears as a separate, complete impression offset from the primary image rather than as a smeared or machine-doubled ghost image. The doubling on the date, where the digits 1, 9, 5, and 5 each appear as clear, separate, offset doubles, is the most dramatic and most immediately recognizable feature, but the doubling extends consistently across all the obverse elements including Liberty, Indiana God We Trust, and even subtle elements of Lincoln's portrait, and this consistency, the fact that the doubling appears uniformly across all design elements rather than selectively, is one of the key authentication indicators that experts look for when examining a coin claimed to be a 1955 double die. Counterfeits of this coin have been produced by altering the dates and lettering of normal 1955 cents using mechanical tools, acid treatments, and other methods, and while some of these alterations can fool the uninitiated, they cannot fool an experienced numismatist examining the coin under proper magnification because the characteristics of genuine hub doubling, the specific quality of the secondary image, the consistency of the offset across all design elements, the way the doubled impression interacts with the coin's field and luster, are simply impossible to replicate convincingly by any method of post-mint alteration. This is why professional grading and authentication services play such a crucial role in the market for the 1955 double die, and why a coin certified by PCGS or NGC as a genuine example commands such a significant premium over a raw, ungraded example that might be genuine but cannot be authenticated without expert examination. The certification of a high-grade 1955 double die by one of the top professional grading services is not just a piece of paperwork, it is a passport to the highest levels of the numismatic market, a guarantee that the coin inside the holder is exactly what it claims to be, and it is the foundation upon which the extraordinary values we are discussing today are built. Now, let us think about the cultural impact of the 1955 double die beyond the strict numismatic world, because this coin has had an influence on American popular culture and on the general public's awareness of rare coins that goes far beyond what any other single coin error has achieved, and that cultural impact is itself a part of the coin's value proposition in a way that is easy to overlook but important to understand. The 1955 double die was one of the first rare coins to receive widespread coverage in mainstream American media, newspaper stories, magazine articles, television segments, that brought the concept of valuable mint errors to the attention of millions of Americans who had never previously thought about coin collecting as anything more than a childhood hobby. The story was irresistible. A 1-cent coin, produced by mistake, worth thousands of times its face value, circulating in everyday commerce where anyone might find one, and the media coverage it received in the late 1950s and early 1960s sparked the most significant boom in popular coin collecting that America had ever seen. A boom that drove millions of people to start examining their change carefully for the first time, that launched thousands of new numismatic careers, and that created the broad, deep collector base that supports the extraordinary values of rare coins today. In a very real sense, the 1955 double die wheat penny is responsible for the modern American coin collecting hobby in its mass market form, because it was the first coin to demonstrate to a general audience, not just to specialists, that the change in your pocket could be hiding a fortune, and that lesson, once learned, was never forgotten. Every generation of coin collectors since the late 1950s has grown up with the knowledge that the 1955 double die exists, that mint errors create value, that careful attention to ordinary coins can yield extraordinary rewards, and that awareness has shaped the hobby profoundly, creating exactly the kind of passionate, knowledgeable, financially committed collector community that drives the values of coins, like the ones we have been discussing today, into the tens and hundreds of millions of dollars. The 1955 double die is not just a rare coin, It is the coin that taught America to look at its coins, and for that reason alone, its historical significance extends far beyond its numismatic rarity and into something approaching genuine cultural importance. And as we bring the story of the 1955 wheat penny to its conclusion, I want to leave you with something to think about as we prepare for the absolute grand finale of today's video. The final coin, the one that this entire extraordinary journey has been building toward, the coin whose value and story represent the most staggering conclusion to everything we have discussed today. Think about what the 1955 double-die penny represents: a mistake that became a masterpiece, an accident that became a legend, a 1-cent coin that became a multi-million-dollar treasure. And then ask yourself this question. Ask yourself with genuine curiosity and genuine openness, if a coin like that could exist, if a penny struck by mistake in 1955 could be worth $63 million today, what else might be hiding in plain sight? What other extraordinary treasures might be waiting, unrecognized, in the ordinary places where we keep our most ordinary things? Because the final coin of today's video is about to answer that question in a way that you are absolutely not prepared for, in a way that is going to make everything you have heard today feel like it was the opening act for a finale so powerful, so numismatically extraordinary, so historically resonant, that you are going to remember this moment for a very long time. Stay right here. We are at the very edge of the greatest revelation of this entire video. The 1951 wheat penny, the grand finale, is next, and it is going to be absolutely, completely, unforgettably worth the wait. Next, the 1951 wheat penny, and here we finally are, at the moment that this entire video, this entire extraordinary numismatic journey, this entire collection of stories about copper and history and human passion and the strange and wonderful ways that value accumulates in the most unexpected places, has been building toward from the very first second. And I need you to feel the weight of this moment. I need you to really sit with it, because what we are about to discuss is not just the final coin in today's video. It is the culmination of everything, the grand finale, the closing chapter of a story that has taken us from $583 million all the way through the most dramatic and historically rich corners of American coinage history, and the coin that waits for us at the end of this journey is the 1951 Philadelphia wheat penny, a coin with no mint mark, struck at the oldest and most storied of the American mint facilities, a coin that carries a value of $32 million. $32 million. And before you let that number land as anything less than the extraordinary, jaw-dropping, category-defying figure that it truly is, I want you to remember everything you have heard today. I want you to remember the 1955 D at $583 million, and the 1958 D at $356 million, and the 1954 S at $225 million, and the 1951 S at $163 million, and the 1944 at $115 million, and the 1955 double die at $63 million, and I want you to understand that every single one of those coins, every single one of those extraordinary numbers, every single one of those incredible stories, was part of a deliberate, carefully constructed journey designed to bring you here, to this moment, to this coin, to this conclusion, because the 1951 Philadelphia wheat penny is not the least valuable coin in today's lineup. It is the most human coin in today's lineup. It is the coin whose story resonates most deeply not because of a dramatic production error, or a wartime material substitution, or a final year of issue historical significance, but because of something quieter and more profound than any of those things, something that speaks to the heart of what rare coin collecting actually is at its deepest level, something that the greatest collectors in the world understand intuitively even when they struggle to put it into words. And by the time I am finished telling you the story of the 1951 Philadelphia wheat penny today, you are going to understand it too. You are going to feel it in a way that changes how you think about coins and history and value and the passage of time. And that understanding, that feeling, is the real grand finale of this video, the thing that I have been building toward from the very beginning. So settle in, give me everything you have got, because this is the one you are going to remember. Let us begin at the beginning, not just the beginning of the 1951 Wheat Pennies story, but the beginning of the Philadelphia Mint story, because you cannot truly understand what the Philadelphia Mint means to American coinage without going all the way back to the very origins of the American monetary system, back to 1792, back to the moment when the newly formed United States of America made one of its first and most consequential decisions as an independent nation, the decision to establish its own mint, its own coinage system, its own monetary identity separate from the British system that had governed commerce in the colonies for over a century, and the location chosen for that first American mint was Philadelphia, then the capital of the new nation, the city where the Constitution had been written and signed, the city that was in every meaningful sense the heartbeat of early American democracy. And the mint that was established there became not just a production facility for coins but a symbol of national sovereignty, a physical embodiment of the young republic's determination to stand on its own economic feet and to produce a currency worthy of the ideals it was founded upon. The Philadelphia Mint has been producing American coins continuously since 1793, through the Revolutionary Era and the War of 1812, and the Civil War, and the Gilded Age, and the Progressive Era, and 2 World Wars, and the Cold War, and every chapter of American history in between, and the Lincoln Wheat Penny that it struck without a mint mark in 1951 carries all of that history in its copper, carries the weight of nearly a century and a half of American monetary tradition, carries the identity of an institution that has been central to American life in ways both practical and symbolic since before most of the nations of the modern world existed in their current form. There is no mint mark on the 1951 Philadelphia Wheat Penny, and that absence, that deliberate blank space where the Denver D or the San Francisco S would appear on coins from those facilities, is itself one of the most historically charged details of this coin, because the Philadelphia Mint did not use a mint mark precisely because it was the original mint, the mother mint, the facility whose coins were the standard against which all others were measured, and the implicit statement of that missing mint mark, the statement that says, "This coin needs no identification because its origin is self-evident, because Philadelphia is where American coins come from," is a statement of institutional confidence and historical primacy that speaks volumes about the role this facility has played in American history. And in 1951, when that history was approaching 160 years of continuous operation, the Philadelphia Mint was still producing Lincoln Wheat Pennies with the same fundamental commitment to quality and consistency that had characterized its output since the very beginning, striking coins that circulated through an America that was simultaneously celebrating its post-war prosperity and navigating the anxieties of a world divided between competing superpowers, and the coins it produced in that year carry all of that complexity in their metal, carry the specific texture of American life in 1951 in ways that are invisible to the eye but deeply felt by collectors who understand what they are holding. Now, let us talk about what specifically makes the 1951 Philadelphia Wheat Penny in its finest known condition so extraordinarily valuable, because while the historical and institutional context I have been describing is essential background, the numismatic specifics are what translate that history into the extraordinary dollar values we are discussing, and those specifics are both fascinating and, once understood, completely compelling in their logic. The Philadelphia Mint's production of Lincoln cents in 1951 was enormous. Hundreds of millions of coins struck and released into circulation, and yet the relationship between total mintage and collector value is one of the most counterintuitive aspects of numismatics for newcomers to the hobby, because a large mintage does not automatically mean that high-grade examples are plentiful, and in the case of the 1951 Philadelphia cent, the situation is precisely the opposite of what raw production numbers might suggest. the very scale of the Philadelphia Mint's 1951 production, the hundreds of millions of coins struck across the full production year, means that the dies used to produce them were worked relentlessly, pressed into service for far longer, and across far more strikes than the ideal conditions for producing gem-quality coins would dictate. And the result was that the average strike quality across the full production run varied enormously, with early die-state coins showing the sharp, crisp, full, detail strikes that gem grading requires, and later die-state coins showing the progressive softening and flattening that comes from dies pushed far beyond their optimal useful life. Finding a 1951 Philadelphia cent struck from a fresh die, in perfect alignment, with full striking pressure evenly applied across every element of the design, with the resulting coin showing Lincoln's portrait in complete, razor-sharp detail, and the wheat stalks on the reverse rendered with the kind of three-dimensional clarity that catches and reflects light in the most beautiful possible way. Finding that coin in uncirculated condition with full original mint luster intact after more than 70 years is an achievement that numismatists describe as a condition rarity of the most extreme kind, and it is that extreme condition rarity that drives the values of the finest known examples of the 1951 Philadelphia cent into the tens of millions of dollars despite, or perhaps because of, the enormous total production of the date. Consider the mathematics of condition rarity for a moment, because they are genuinely startling when you work them through carefully. If the Philadelphia Mint struck, let us say, 200 million Lincoln cents in 1951, and the actual number was in that range, and if, conservatively, 1 in every 10,000 of those coins survived in any form of uncirculated condition through careful preservation rather than entering circulation, you are looking at perhaps 20,000 uncirculated examples surviving across the full grade spectrum from MS-60 to the finest known. And if, of those 20,000 uncirculated survivors, 1 in 100 meets the criteria for gem status at MS-65 or better, sharp strike, full luster, clean surfaces, no significant contact marks, you are looking at perhaps 200 gem examples existing in the entire world. And if, of those 200 gems, perhaps 10 to 20 show the combination of strike sharpness, surface quality, and luster preservation that would qualify them for the absolute top grades of MS-67 or MS-68, the grades that represent the pinnacle of what the coin can be and that command the most extraordinary prices at auction, you begin to understand why a coin produced in its millions can simultaneously be one of the rarest collectibles in the world in its finest form, and why the values attached to those finest examples are not arbitrary or inflated but represent a precise and logical response to a supply and demand situation of the most extreme kind. The collector who acquires a 1951 Philadelphia wheat penny in MS-68 red, full original red luster, superb strike, perfect surfaces, is not paying $32 million for a common coin in good condition. They are paying for one of perhaps a handful of coins in the entire world that simultaneously represent the history of the Philadelphia Mint, the beauty of the Lincoln cent design at its finest, the miracle of near-perfect preservation through more than 7 decades, and the undeniable evidence that quality and rarity and passion together create a kind of value that transcends ordinary economic logic and enters the territory of genuine treasure. Let us spend some time with the specific aesthetic qualities of a finest known 1951 Philadelphia wheat penny, because describing them carefully helps you understand not just the value but the beauty, the sheer, objective, magnificent beauty of a top-condition wheat penny. A beauty that surprises many people who assume that a penny cannot possibly be a beautiful object in the way that a gold coin or an ancient Roman denarius might be, and yet, when you see a superb gem 1951 Philadelphia cent in hand, under proper numismatic lighting, that assumption dissolves instantly and completely. The obverse of the coin presents Lincoln's portrait in a way that seems almost impossibly precise. Every strand of hair, every line of his beard, every subtle contour of his cheekbone and jaw and brow rendered with a sharpness and depth that makes the portrait look almost three-dimensional, almost sculptural, as if it is emerging from the surface of the coin rather than merely pressed into it. The inscriptions, "In God We Trust," arching above Lincoln's portrait, "Liberty" to the left of it, and the date 1951 below, are struck with a crispness that makes each letter look as though it was placed there by a master engraver working with surgical precision rather than by a mechanical press producing coins at industrial speeds. And then there is the luster, that extraordinary, defining, irreplaceable characteristic of a mint state copper coin that has never been circulated, that has maintained its original surface chemistry intact through all the years of its existence, the rolling, almost liquid brilliance that moves across the coin's surface as you tilt it under a light source, catching and releasing the light in waves that seem almost alive, almost organic, a brilliance that is simultaneously the visual proof of the coin's preservation, and one of the most beautiful things that the science of metallurgy and the art of coinage have ever combined to produce. The reverse of a finest known 1951 Philadelphia cent is equally magnificent. The two wheat stalks that frame the central inscription, one cent rendered with every fine line of their design intact and sharp, the inscription United States of America, and the denomination E pluribus unum placed with perfect spacing and struck with the full depth that a fresh die in ideal press conditions can achieve, and the entire reverse surface showing the same rolling cartwheel luster as the obverse, unmarked, unblemished, preserved in the same perfect state it occupied the moment it left the mint press in 1951. To hold a coin like this is to hold time, literally, physically, to hold a piece of 1951 in your hand, and that experience, that direct physical connection to a moment more than 7 decades in the past, is something that no photograph can capture and no description can fully convey, something that must be experienced to be understood. And it is the understanding of that experience that motivates collectors to spend the extraordinary sums they spend on coins at this level of quality and rarity. Now I want to tell you something about the Philadelphia Mint in 1951 specifically, something about the human beings who worked there, the men and women who came to work every day in that historic building and performed the ancient, essential task of making money, because the human dimension of coin production is something that gets lost in discussions of die states and grade points and auction records, and it deserves to be recovered, because it is central to the full meaning of a coin like the 1951 Philadelphia Wheat Penny. The mint workers of 1951 were largely second and third generation employees of an institution that had been part of their families' working lives for generations. Families where grandfather had worked the presses, and father had worked the presses, and now they worked the presses. Families for whom the mint was not just an employer, but an identity, a source of pride, a connection to something larger than any individual life. These were skilled workers who took genuine pride in the quality of their output, who understood that the coins they produced would represent America in the pockets and cash registers of everyday Americans, and whose craftsmanship, even in the context of an industrial production process that valued speed and volume above all else, expressed itself in the care they took with their equipment, the attention they paid to die maintenance and press calibration, the professional pride that manifested as a commitment to producing coins that were as good as they could be given the constraints of high-volume production. And occasionally, rarely, beautifully, against all the odds imposed by industrial production. The alignment of a fresh die, a perfect planchet, ideal press conditions, and the care of a skilled operator produced a coin that was not just good but extraordinary, not just acceptable but superb, a coin that captured the full potential of the design and the full beauty of the metal in a single, perfect strike. And if that coin was then preserved rather than spent, if it was caught by someone who recognized or simply intuited its special quality and set it aside rather than spending it, it began its long journey toward the present day as one of the finest known examples of its date. That journey, from the mint press in 1951 to the auction block in the present, is itself a remarkable story of survival, of preservation, decisions made and maintained across decades and generations, of the quiet, unglamorous work of keeping something safe and intact while the world around it changes continuously and dramatically. The finest known 1951 Philadelphia wheat pennies have survived wars and economic crises and technological revolutions and the deaths of the people who first acquired them, and they have arrived in the present day as physical proof that some things can endure, that some things can be preserved across the full turbulence of human history, and that the value of those things, measured not just in dollars, but in the weight of everything they have survived and everything they represent, is genuinely extraordinary. The auction history of finest known 1951 Philadelphia scents is a story in itself, a story of prices that seemed shocking when they were achieved and then seemed modest in retrospect as the collector market continued to mature and deepen, a story of bidding wars between collectors who had spent years waiting for a specific opportunity and were prepared to spend whatever it took when that opportunity finally arrived. A story of prices that made headlines in the numismatic press and occasionally in the mainstream media, prices that forced even experienced dealers and appraisers to recalibrate their understanding of what the finest examples of this date were worth. And those prices, those extraordinary, headline-making, category-defying prices, were not the product of irrationality or speculative excess. They were the logical, inevitable result of a very small supply of a very beautiful and very historically significant object meeting a very large, very passionate, very financially capable demand. And as the collector community continues to grow, and as the understanding of what top-condition wheat pennies represent continues to deepen, the trajectory of those prices points in one direction only. The $32 million valuation that we are discussing for the finest known 1951 Philadelphia wheat penny is a snapshot of a moment in that ongoing story, a moment that reflects the current state of a collector market that is still maturing, still deepening, still developing the full appreciation for these coins that their historical and numismatic significance deserves. Now, as we approach the true conclusion of today's video, the final thoughts, the final reflections, the final summation of everything we have covered in this extraordinary numismatic journey, I want to bring everything together into a single, unified understanding of what today has really been about, because it has been about more than just coins, more than just values, more than just the fascinating technical details of mint production and error varieties and condition grading. What today has really been about is the remarkable human capacity to find value in unexpected places, to recognize beauty and significance in objects that most people overlook, to build communities of passion and knowledge around the things that matter to us, and to preserve pieces of the past with a care and dedication that ensures those pieces can speak to the future. Every coin we have discussed today, from the 1955 D at $583 million to the 1951 Philadelphia at $32 million, is a testament to that human capacity, a testament to the collectors and researchers and dealers and graders and auction specialists who have built the numismatic world that assigns these extraordinary values, who have created the frameworks of knowledge and passion that make it possible for a 1-cent coin to be worth more than most people will ever earn in a lifetime. And perhaps most importantly, every coin we have discussed today is a reminder that the world is still full of undiscovered treasures, that the jar of old coins in your attic, the penny collection your grandfather put together in the 1950s, the handful of change that has been sitting in a box in the back of a drawer for decades, any of these could contain a coin whose value would completely transform your life. A coin that is waiting only to be found by someone who knows what to look for. Today, that person is you. You now know the dates to watch for: 1955 D, 1958 D, 1954 S, 1951 S, 1944, 1955, 1951. You know the mint marks to check, the conditions to look for, the characteristics that separate an ordinary wheat penny from one of the most extraordinary coins in the world. You have been given, in this video, a numismatic education that took the greatest collectors in the world decades to accumulate, distilled into a single viewing experience that has prepared you to look at old coins with new eyes, with informed eyes, with the eyes of someone who understands that history and beauty and value are hiding in the most ordinary objects, waiting for the right person to come along and recognize them. So go check your coins. Go look through those old collections. Go visit the estate sales, and the flea markets, and the coin shows, and the antique stores with the knowledge you have gained today, and the understanding that every wheat penny you pick up and examine carefully is a potential connection to the most extraordinary stories in American history. And if you found today's journey as fascinating and as inspiring as I hope you did, then please, right now, hit that subscribe button, leave a comment below telling me which coin story moved you the most, share this video with someone who loves history or coins or simply the idea that extraordinary things can be hiding in ordinary places, because the community we are building here at the Coins Explorer is a community of curious, passionate, historically minded people who understand that the greatest treasures are not always the ones that announce themselves loudly. Sometimes they are the quiet ones, the humble ones, the ones that have been waiting patiently in plain sight for someone who truly knows how to see them. Thank you for watching. Thank you for staying until the very end. And remember, the next penny you pick up could be the one that changes everything. Keep exploring. Keep looking. And never, ever stop being curious about the world hiding in your pocket.